Hello YouTube and welcome to Full Dottle, a channel dedicated to tamping topics such as pipes, tobacco, lore, and more. I am your host, the Bearded Briarman, and without further ado, let's get lit. Welcome back everyone, and happy Cobb Tuesday. On this episode of Full Dottle, I'm going to be telling you another story about a black bear encounter that I had. But first, a little housekeeping. I am smoking my Missouri Meerschaum Country Gentleman with a Forever stem, and in it, I've got none other than F-Dob Blend number 3 Barking Squirrel. So, my first video, Very Scary, was my first encounter with a black bear. This video is going to be about after I had went a few more times and I had actually had a few more encounters with black bears, but I had learned quite a bit about them and I wasn't quite as afraid of them. At my work, I was telling some of the stories with a buddy of mine who said he loved to go camping. And so I told him I'm going on another trip this weekend. If you would like, come with me. All you need to do is bring whatever food sources you want and go ahead and bring a tent so that you can sleep that night in your tent. He said, no problem. Got it. I sent him the GPS coordinates for where we were going to begin hiking and the address closest to where we were going to start because it was at a trailhead. We were going to start off on the trail and then branch off from that again with a little bushwhacking. It wasn't a cut trail. I was going to use my GPS and show him some of the waterfalls in the area. So, Saturday morning rolls around because we were actually going to do just an overnight. I didn't want to try to get out there Friday after work and the sun's going down and all that stuff, so I said we'll set out first thing on Saturday morning. So I meet him up there. Right away I could tell that this guy didn't quite understand what I was talking about when I said we were going on a bushwhacking, hiking expedition. Because he showed up and he had nothing more than a backpack and a rolled up tent. Now in his backpack he had enough food for him for the day and that night and everything, but a rolled up tent, nowhere to stick anything. It was kind of wanting. So I thought, well, you're going to have an issue carrying that tent around because it wouldn't fit in his backpack, but we set out anyway. So we set out on our hike. We had hiked half of a day probably, and there was a huge hill. And I stopped at the bottom of the hill. I said, I'm going to take just a little bit of a break before we continue. He said, okay. He said, I'm going to go to the top of the hill. I just want to see what we've got ahead of us. I said, no problem. So I set my pack down, and he went on ahead. About halfway up the hill, I hear him whispering. I turn and look. He's calling my name. He says, Dallas, come here, come here. So I was like, all right. He says, bear. And I said, no. He said, yeah. So I got up. Inside of my pack, I had 2 air horns. I grabbed one of them, walked over to him, and sure enough, there was a black bear up on the hillside away from the path that we were walking. This was a very large male black bear from what I could tell. Largest one I had ever seen at that time. And he was just flipping rocks over looking for something to eat. And I mean flipping boulders over with ease, just tossing them. And I said, watch this. And I pulled out my air horn and I gave it one quick blast. And of course his head comes up and he looks and sees us. And he's probably, I would say he was anywhere from 30 to 35 yards up this hill off the path. So rather close to us, but you know, nothing dangerous. But as he looks at us, I blast the horn one more time, and he takes off, and I mean, he is booking it. And so my buddy was clearly shaking. He was just like, "Oh my gosh." So I said, I've got an extra air horn. I'll let you have that one. Just keep it on you. If you see one, just blast it. And you know, they're more scared of you than we are of them. I guarantee you, they're not a threat. Don't worry about it. So we continued on with our hike. And throughout the entire hike, he's talking about that black bear. I mean, it shook him. He was scared. So I was trying to calm him down, telling him, you know, black bears are not a threat. They're, you know, believe it or not, they're relatively docile. They're not going to mess with you. As long as they hear you coming up and you don't mess with them, just blow your air horn, they'll go away. So we keep going, and finally I said, man, it was starting to get, you know, later in the afternoon. And I think we had less than 5 miles of the path that we had taken. And I circled back after we had seen 2 of these waterfalls back there. And we had less than 5 miles to circle back. And so I said, hey, it's going to start getting dark pretty soon. We only have probably 3 hours left of daylight. Let's go ahead and set up camp and eat something for the night, get our foods put up in the tree, and you know, just kind of bed down for the night. Long hike that day, so he agreed. He's like, okay. So I found a spot, and I had an actual hiking pack. And on my hiking pack, of course, you know, being in the Marine Corps, your gear is very important. It's probably the most important thing besides your mental attitude. So I was ready. I had a sleeping mat, sleeping bag, tent. I always have a hiking stick for snakes, be able to, you know, toss them off to the side if I need to. But I also use my hiking stick to level out areas where I'm going to put my tent, because you don't want it to be all uneven ground. Your sleep will be horrible. And so I set up my tent, no time at all, just a little pup tent, 2-man dome. He has a 4-man dome and is struggling quite heavily with it. So I help him put his up, and after I get mine up, I help him put his up. We eat a meal, then I take my pack has a removable section for your food. I tie it up, I get his, I tell him go ahead and put it in his backpack. I carry some 550 cord with me, throw it over a branch where it can hang, and I pull it up where it's, you know, over 8 foot so a bear can't reach it. And we set back. I probably put it 100 feet or more from the camp, and we set up. Built a fire, night falls, telling stories. We had a great time. But there was movement around us that night, and it was really starting to unsettle my camping partner. And so he was like, man, what do you think that is? And so I'm listening, and you can just barely hear light footsteps. And I tell him, it's probably whitetail in the area, because that's not a very heavy footstep. They're not really running around. They're just kind of seeing who we are. But it being nighttime, it could be raccoons, could be white-tailed deer. Nothing to be scared of, though. But I said, you've got that air horn, watch. And we sat there and we waited for just a minute. We heard another footstep, and I blew it. And then you could hear it, what absolutely was white-tailed deer trotting off. They were, you know, running away from us when I blew the horn. Well, I shouldn't have done that, because now every time he heard anything, he blew his air horn. So this goes on. We stay up for a few hours after nightfall, telling stories and all of that stuff. And finally I say, hey man, we better go ahead and bed down for the night, because we got to get up early so that we can hit this trail and get out of here hopefully by around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd like to be home for supper. So he's like, all right, cool. He hops in his tent, I hop in my tent, and I'm ready to sleep. But as I'm laying there, all of a sudden I hear, he blows the air horn. And this goes on forever. Several hours every time I would hear anything out in the woods. And we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're bushwhacking. This is not on a trail. This is not at the lake where there's campsites. This is out in the middle of what my father would call Ford country. This was out in Cass, Arkansas, and I'm talking deep, deep woods. And so he's blowing this horn for hours. And finally, as I'm laying there, I hear, and his horn goes dead. Next thing he says, Dallas, my horn went dead. And I said, all right, buddy, good night. And I went to sleep. And I slept like a baby that whole night. Next morning we got up. He looked razzle-dazzled because, I mean, just, he did not sleep very good. You could tell. I felt bad for him. But he told me he had been camping before. I didn't realize his idea of camping was literally at, you know, you go to the lake and they have those campsites set up where they have the concrete picnic tables and the grill, you know, put in the ground, and that's his idea of camping. He had never been camping what I thought of camping. Because when I was growing up, I never camped on the lake like that. Never. We always went, my dad called this area that we went, which was also in Madison County, he called it Vietnam because it was, I mean, it was just, it looked like a jungle out there, and there were no humans around for miles, and that was camping to me. So I didn't even know about lake camping until I was an adult. But anyway, so that's my story. That's going to do it for this episode of Full Dottle. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up, and until the next time we see each other, I bid you farewell and happy piping. Bye, everyone. Don't forget to enlist in the Full Dottle platoon. It's easy. Just click the subscribe button. Also, hit the bell icon to be notified as soon as I upload the next episode.